We don't understand the world. Like, I do think the world is more like a musical masterpiece than it is like anything else. And things are oddly connected. Now, you know, I know that sounds new agey and it sounds metaphysical, and I'm saying bluntly, this is speculative, right? I'm feeling out beyond the limits of my knowledge. But there are things I'm not willing to dismiss the mysterious, because I've experienced the mysterious in a variety of different ways, and it's very mysterious, very.
From a cognitive perspective, is that not the most rational position to take in any case? Because we know our cognition is inherently bounded by a whole range of constraints.
Well, we certainly know that we're bounded by ignorance, and that there's far more going on than we know or can know. We do. The problem is that when you start to speculate, it's a projection of your imagination. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that is actually, knowledge advances through projection of imagination. But the problem is you can see yourself reflected back at you, and then it's self-fulfilling. So you can see what you want. The most ancient ideas we have about the nature of reality are predicated on a certain presupposition. And the presupposition is this. There's two fundamental modes of being that characterize reality. One is the absolute. And the absolute is the sum total of everything. So if you think about things in their most unbounded possible form, if you think of things in their infinite number of potential variations, you can think about that as one pole of reality. It appears classically that people have regarded their encounters with the absolute, which is all those multiple levels of being that are beyond your perceptual capacity, as equivalent to an encounter with God. So people often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. First of all, it's an attempt to box me in a sense. And the reason that it's an attempt to box me in is because the question is asked so that I can be firmly placed on one side of a binary argument. And the reason I don't like to answer it is because A, I don't like to be boxed in, and B, because I don't know what the person means by believe or God. And they think they know. And the probability that they construe belief and construe God the same way I do is virtually zero. So it's a question that doesn't work for me on multiple levels of analysis. But strangely enough, just as we were talking, the answer to that question popped into my head. I act as if God exists. Now you can decide for yourself whether that means that I believe in him, so to speak. But I act as if he exists. So that's a good enough answer for that.
All right, so let's dumb this down for just 1 second, because I want to ask a question that I know you don't like getting when we get in the Q&As, but I think it would be interesting for the three of us to sort of kick it around here, which is, for the average person that's listening to this, that can only take in so many of these ideas and so much of this, right? And I think that actually is most people that are just living their lives. I think a certain set of people are listening to both of you and going, all right, these two guys think that some guy is talking to them from the sky. I mean, I know this is the most, I know why you don't love this question, because it's so ridiculously oversimplified. But how do you get to those people then? For the people that think, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Shapiro loves facts over feelings, but he's talking about this imaginary sky guy that wrote this book and blah, blah, blah. What do you think is there a psychological trick to sort of get people over that hump if you wanted them to start exploring some of this? Well, you know what I mean? We can do the high level stuff for hours and hours, but eventually it just keeps getting to a sort of smaller and smaller place that people can get to.
All right, so that's so hard a question, and so I'll try to address it this way. So there's a line in the New Testament where Christ says that no one comes to the Father except through him, which is a hell of a thing for anyone to say. I mean, there's a lot of statements in the New Testament that are strikingly strange in that manner. I am the way and the truth and the life. That's another one. It's associated with the same idea.
Yeah. And we'll get to some of the New Testament, Old Testament stuff.
So here's the idea, and it bears on your question, although I don't exactly know how. It's as if there's a spirit at the bottom of things that is involved in the bringing to being of everything. So for example, people talk about evolution as a random process, but that's not true. It's not true. the mutations are random. But there's also a lot of other sources of genetic variation. But the selection mechanisms are not random. So now then the question is, what are the selection mechanisms? So I'm going to have to go a bunch of places to answer this question.
Survival mostly,
well,
I think.
Well, here's one selection mechanism.
Yeah.
It's like, so human females are very sexually selective. That's why you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. So the male failure rate for reproduction is twice that of the females. Okay, so the question is, well, how is it that males succeed differentially? And the first answer is, well, females reject. Human females reject. But then the question might be, well, they reject on the basis of what? And the answer is, well, it's something like competence. And then the question is, well, how is competence defined? And then the answer to that is, well, men put themselves in hierarchies and they vote on each other's competence. And it's really counterintuitive in some sense from an evolutionary perspective, because you'd have to ask yourself, why would men put themselves in positions where they elevate some men in status and then give them a huge reproductive advantage, given that that's to their reproductive disadvantage in some sense? Okay, and there are reasons. Part of that might be, well, let's say you decide to follow the best leader in a battle. Well, then you don't die. Like, he might get all the women, but you don't die, so at least you're still in the game. And it might be the same if you're following the greatest hunter. And the greatest hunter wouldn't be the person who is best at bringing down the game. It would be the person who is best at bringing down the game and sharing it and organizing the next hunt and all of that, right? And so men will organize themselves into groups and privilege certain men, and that puts them ahead in the reproductive hierarchy. And so what that means to some degree is that there's a spirit of masculinity that's shaping the entire structure of human evolutionary history. That's what that means. And then I think, okay, well, that might just be a biological epiphenomenon. And so it would be a spirit it's the spirit of positive masculinity that manifests itself across epochal ages, millions of years perhaps, and it actually has shaped our consciousness, actually. And so you can think about that as a figure, and it would be the figure that emerges. It's like the essential spirit of all the great men who defined what greatness constituted. That's a spirit. Okay, now that's a purely biological explanation. You could say, well, that's God for all intents and purposes. You might have an image of that built right into you. Even the sense that you can experience something divine and paternal might be merely a reflection of that evolutionary process. So that would be a biologically reductive argument for the existence of what we experience as God. But then there's another possibility too, which is that that's actually reflective of a deeper metaphysical reality that has to do with the nature of consciousness itself. And I would say that I think that's true. I believe the biological case, and I believe the biologically reductive case, but I don't think that exhausts it. I think that there's a metaphysical layer underneath that the biology is a genuine reflection of. And that's the sort of the macrocosm above and the microcosm below. That we are really reflective, including in our consciousness, of something about the structure of reality itself. And that might involve whatever it is that God is.
Well, so that's why I think this is so interesting, because what you're doing there, especially at the end, is you're giving it a little room to say, I don't know, right?
Well, you have to.
Yeah, but I think that's what people don't want to grant you
Well,
guys.
this is why I don't like the question, do you believe in God? Right. It's like, well, to me that question is always like, well, what makes you so sure that you know that God exists? And it's like, well, I'm not sure. I'm not willing to claim that certainty, you know. Is his resurrection real? Well, his spirit lives on. That's certainly the case. Let's imagine that a spirit is a pattern of being. And we know that patterns can exist, patterns can be transmitted across multiple substrates, right? Vinyl, electronic impulses, air, vibrations in your ear, neurological patterns, dance. It's all the translation of what you might describe as a spirit. Right? It's that pattern. It's independent of its material substrate. Well, Christ's spirit lives on. It's had a massive effect across time. God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that means in some sense is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live. And that's also part of the problem of deriving values from facts, because you're evanescent and you can't derive the right values from the facts that portray themselves to you in your lifespan, which is why you have a biological structure that's like 3.5 billion years old. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men. So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise. And those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father. It's also the same thing that makes men attractive to women, because women peel off the top of the male hierarchy, and the question is what should be at the top of the hierarchy, and the answer right now is tyranny as part of the patriarchy, but the real answer is something more like the ability to use truthful speech in the service of, let's say, well-being. And so that's something that operates across tremendous expanses of time, and it plays a role in the selection for survival itself, which makes it a fundamental reality.
Jordan, if I can I just cut in here with one question?
I'll stop with that for now.
What percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
I don't know, Sam. It's a good question, because when I go talk to people, when I talk to people online and use exactly this terminology, millions of people listen. So it's not so obvious what percentage of people see it this way. It may be that they have the intuitions, but they haven't been articulated well.
I mean, this is the problem. This is what worries me about this. So,
Well, there's a deep idea in the West, too. It's like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it. Try to be a good person so you don't make it worse. Well, that's a truth,